I want to welcome everybody to this Focus the Nation panel. Focus the Nation is a campus-wide conversation about climate change. There are events happening today at over 1,500 colleges and universities across the country. This panel is called Rebuilding in the Face of Global Warming, a topic which is particularly relevant in New Orleans, a city which is in the process of a major rebuilding and which is being raised more and more around the world as climate change alters the places where we live. Our panelists are John Klingman, a longtime professor of the School of Architecture. He's currently teaching sustainability and tectonics. Carrie Klaus, also a professor at the School of Architecture, who teaches first-year design studio and also has the Frederick P. Rose Architectural Fellowship to work with the Office of Providence Community Housing to develop green, affordable housing development. And Charles Allen of the Center for Bioenvironmental Research and the Holy Cross Neighborhood Association.
Following on the last panel, I'd just like to make a couple of comments about potential resources. One is this amazing article in Science magazine from 2004, 13 August, that's called Stabilization Wedges, Solving the Climate Problem for the Next 50 Years with Current Technologies. And it references 15 different steps that can be taken to gradually cut the carbon increase, the carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere to get us into some sort of stable condition. Extremely important article of these 15 wedges that the scientists talk about. Two of them actually refer to buildings, but it turns out that buildings are a larger part of the problem than that would indicate, or have a larger opportunity. Another reference that I would have for you is the State of the World series, published by the World Watch Foundation. State of the World 07 has a number of current data regarding the carbon issue and how we can begin to address the condition. And then finally, the architecture2030.org, Ed Mazria's realization that in fact buildings and architects have an enormous potential to contribute to this condition. 48% of the U.S. economy in terms of energy use is devoted to buildings. And about a third of the energy use in the world is devoted to buildings. It's already come up in the previous discussion that our footprint, both with respect to energy use and with respect to carbon in the U.S., is very high. Our carbon footprint per capita is 2 times that of Japan and Germany. So the notion that we can't cut either both our carbon and energy use without losing any type of lifestyle advantages that this society has developed seems clear that we can do this, and that in fact we must do this. So now, without doing too much more, just one more statistic, and then I want to show you a few images. There are 5 billion new square feet of building construction in the U.S. every year, and 5,000 million square feet of renovation in the U.S. every year. It's quite obvious that this amount of construction offers huge opportunities for more sustainable design. And I want to put this now in the frame of our more global environmental condition, and I'll do that with a few images. So here we are, looking at the atmosphere. And the fact that human beings have affected the planet is obvious. But a few years ago, I was actually at the Tulane event for the end of the year, and I was standing behind a person who was an engineer, probably a parent or something, and he was making the point that he didn't think that people could really affect the globe, that the globe was so big that anything that humans did was probably not going to have an effect. Well, it turns out from early times, even in the time that the Cahokia Mound was built, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, that people have had the intention, in fact, of changing the face of the earth. Here, they made these huge earthen structures without the benefit of wheels. So it was an application of technology in the service of sort of memorializing a place, but with clearly the intent of making substantial modifications in the face of the earth. They use wooden structures as well. Now, sometimes we don't get it right. This is actually Stonehenge. Well, it's not exactly Stonehenge. It's actually a copy of Stonehenge by a person in the state of Washington that was fascinated with the monument, and he decided to replicate it. What he didn't realize was that Stonehenge was related to the celestial conditions, and so it was latitude dependent. So it wouldn't have worked as a calendar because he put it in the state of Washington, and he didn't even orient it with respect to the cardinal points in the same way the original was. So sometimes we're a little bit optimistic, perhaps, in understanding relationships between us and the wider environment. Here's another example, Isamu Noguchi, the famous 20th century sculptor, and making a sort of abstract composition of miniature in the western United States. Again, an attempt to sort of understand place and perhaps our relation to it. The condition of the coastline has certainly taught us to be perhaps more sensitive now in the time after Katrina. There we can see some sort of destroyed landscape where people were perhaps insufficiently attentive to the environmental conditions and frankly built in the wrong place. So this is one of the principles of sustainable design, which is to build in the right place in the first instance. And then we have these places that we find where there is this conjunction of building, landscape, and place. This is one of my favorite examples of that, an agricultural image where obviously the things that we see there were done by human intervention. They were done by design. There's a windbreak around the farm to provide shelter from winter winds and shade in the summer. There is the allée of trees that mark the kind of entrance to the farm. And these things have environmental as well as aesthetic and sustainable consequences. So this is kind of the goal, and I think it's the kind of goal that we have now in 2008, in the same way that these people in the 19th century had the goal, but now our technology has both created these challenges and opportunities. So here we get to these interventions between people and the land, in which buildings are a part. So in sustainability discussions, it's not just buildings, but it's buildings and land together in an environmental whole. Sometimes the environmental consequences related to buildings are also pretty extreme. This is clear cutting of forests in the Northwest, which you know also is occurring particularly in Brazil in the tropical areas, making great floors for us here in the US, but also depleting the natural ecology and putting more CO2 into the atmosphere at the same time. And that's what happens. All of this stuff gets used and hopefully reused, and as it gets reused, it becomes less intensive in energy use, and so that's another one of our principles, that we can reuse rather than rebuild. And I can talk for a second about the fact that this building represents a reuse. This building, as some of you know, was stripped down to its structure, absolutely nothing left other than concrete. And I can't tell you how many people on campus would ask me, why didn't they just tear this thing down? Well, it turns out that we saved a lot of money and a lot of resources by using this concrete structure compared to starting anew. And this is another principle. So sometimes people are talking about cities as though cities were part of the problem, but in some ways, cities represent a kind of agglomeration of capital, of buildings and of resources, and a kind of density of transportation infrastructure, for example, that probably makes a lower per capita energy use than in other situations. Now, this probably isn't very sustainable. These are two stadiums that were built within the last, less than 10 years, and you can see they're completely surrounded by paved parking, impervious surfaces, generating the heat island effect and causing a direct addition to global warming rather than an addition to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but still contributing to the problem rather than to the solution. Boston at night, Boston in the daytime. Now, we still have a way to go, just in terms of the most simple procedures for lowering energy use. And this is true on our campus as well as being true throughout the US. This is last summer in New York City. I'm not sure all those office buildings are probably populated right now, but they're still being very well lit by electric lighting. So the reduction in energy use by simple devices as well as by more complex new technologies is really important. So here's the sort of old days where the giant power station on Manhattan's East River was supplying this coal-fired electricity to the city. And we know now that this is not something that can continue, although right now in this country there are about 24 coal-fired power plants under construction and another 24 that are being planned. Here's one. This is an older one, and sometimes the older ones are still in use, causing even more problems for global greenhouse gas concentrations. And there it is. So is this the answer? Maybe not. As we know, the nuclear condition has its own difficulties, but somehow we've got to generate some power. The last panel talked about renewable resources as being part of the answer, but clearly for this country, 4.5% of the world's population, 26% of the world's energy use, we've got to do something on the other side, on the demand side as well. Well, here we're still on the supply side in New Orleans, with these huge petrochemical installations, which, as we know, have contributed a bit to our other issues of climate difficulties. And even off the Gulf of Mexico, air travel, turns out, is not the simple non-polluting alternative. In fact, the stratosphere is getting concentrations of water vapor and other gases as a result of the tremendous amount of aviation travel at these high altitudes, which are also affecting the condition. So here's America beyond New Orleans. The condition that the individual building is part of a system that demands huge amounts of transportation infrastructure. This is the city of Denver. Look at the amount of space on the ground that's devoted to the automobile. Absolutely vast. In many cities in the US, 1/3 of the ground area is devoted to the automobile. Enormous resources that are following the direction of the culture. Not so much technology, but the direction of our culture, which has permeated the automobile. Clearly, that's got to change. Los Angeles and the channelized Los Angeles River. Another example of the sort of machine condition within urban culture. Now, the 19th century city, though, was denser and more friendly to pedestrian and commercial intermixture. And of course, that's what we have intact in the French Quarter. And we're one of the great demonstrations of this kind of urban interplay in our country. This is a close-up of part of the French Quarter, and you can see the interplay of outdoor space, courtyards, buildings that are in fronting the street, commercial buildings with residential above, all the things that make for a society less dependent on transportation infrastructure for its very existence. Now, the problem with sustainability at the building scale is that sometimes things that make sense at the building scale don't make sense at the larger scale. This is an example of an award-winning building. In fact, it's a LEED Platinum structure, the headquarters for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. But the new building, while it's right on the shores of the bay, and this group's trying to save the bay, actually is about 6 miles from Annapolis, and the building's previous, or the organization's previous headquarters was downtown. So people could kind of walk, or they could bike, or they could take transit to work, and now everybody has to drive, although they do point out that they have kayak docking facilities at the building.
and there's the front of the building. This is the side you never see in the architectural photographs, and you can see the giant parking lot, because that's how most people get to the building. So in sustainability, we're always thinking about how the architectural picture fits in or not to the bigger picture. Sometimes it makes more sense to renovate than build new. Sometimes it makes more sense to not build at all. Now, interestingly, right now, not only in New Orleans, but throughout the U.S. and even the world, architects are becoming more interested in sustainability. I'm showing right now 3 buildings by one of the most important U.S. architecture firms, Morphosis. This one in a state office building in Los Angeles. This one, a federal office building in San Francisco, with glass fins on the northwest side, and this one, a federal courthouse in Eugene, Oregon, all by the same firm. And this firm, until about 5 years ago, sustainability was something that never even crossed their radar screen. And now all of their buildings are LEED rated. In fact, this one, which is arguably the one that looks the least green, is a LEED Platinum. It's the highest rated building of the 3. But sustainability has definitely caught the attention of the architectural profession. Now, in some ways, though, I think it's interesting to just hark back to what was the academical village idea of Thomas Jefferson in the design that he made for the University of Virginia, where not only was there an academic quad in which professors and students lived and learned together, but behind the lawn, there's this other section of gardens, places where people would grow food, and behind that was even a set of dining facilities in which the food that was grown within the university would become part of the edible condition. And then even the privies are located out in the garden. So there's an idea about composting from the early 19th century. New Orleans, this is the Domino Sugar Refinery on the river. And the sugar refinery, I found out, was always located near slaughterhouses because one of the processes for refining sugar is polishing, and they use the bones from slaughterhouses. And the people in visiting the sugar refinery said there's absolutely no effluent from this. Every part of the manufacturing process is reused in another part of the manufacturing process. And this is really another goal of sustainability. Taking old buildings and renovating them. This was an abandoned building at a federal Navy yard that the federal government sold, and now it's a headquarters for a commercial firm within this old industrial structure. 19th century city in Boston, now they've got community gardens. So there's the interplay of vegetation and the importance of vegetation with the city. And I think we can also look to some traditional architectural cultures. And recently I've become fascinated with Japan. The examples of very low technology buildings where the beauty of the interplay between indoors and out is celebrated rather than kind of walling off buildings with air conditioning and separating them from the environment. And it seems to me that this is a more civilized way to think about life. And of course, it's more sustainable. It's not very different, perhaps, from a lot of the 19th century ideas in our region. And I'll end with these 2 images, one in which we can just continue to clutter up the landscape with whatever we want to do, and the other in which the landscape kind of offers us all kinds of potential that we can tap into. Thank you.